Hello and welcome to World Talks with me, Ashim Kumar. Hungary's political transformation continues at pace. President Tamás Sulyok has signed away his own term in office. Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó has quit for a role at BYD, and Viktor Orbán's allies face mounting pressure. Here to unpack it all is Daniel Hegedüs. He's Deputy Director of the Institute for European Politics. Daniel, welcome back to UP World, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
Good evening. It's a pleasure as always. So, the President has signed himself out of a job. What's going on?
Yes, I think it's fair to say that we see a successful conclusion of the first wave or first period of legislative and constitutional measures on the part of the new governing majority, which addressed and tried to dismantle the state capture of the Hungarian constitutional institutions, restore the rule of law, and restore the independence of judiciary and checks and balances. Last Monday, the Hungarian parliament passed the 17th amendment of the Hungarian fundamental law, so practically the constitution. And this includes the end of the term of the current Hungarian president, Tamás Sulyok, as it was mentioned, but also introduces an age limit for constitutional justices, which also results in the end of the term of the president of the Constitutional Court and 3 other constitutional justices. And we see also a significant number of further reform measures that addresses, for example, the Supreme Court Curia, the National Judiciary Office, which is the key administrative and management institution in Hungary of the courts. And all of this culminates practically in removing the most important potential or perceived veto players of the former Orbán regime, who could actually oppose the legislative measures of the current Hungarian government.
Right, so Prime Minister Magyar is obviously cleaning house with a vengeance. Now, Viktor Orbán is saying this is undermining the law, you know. Where's the rule of law gone? Does he have a point? I mean, aren't they simply changing the rules to, push their own political agenda?
On the one hand, what we see in Hungary is not so fundamentally different from the measures the Orbán regime used in the first 4 years of its power after 2010. I just would like to underline the removal of the that time president of the Hungarian Supreme Court Curia with the that time new Hungarian fundamental law in 2002. There are indeed certain measures in this 17th amendment that raise certain concerns, but these are not those what we mentioned. There is also a 12-year term limits introduced for members of parliament, which indeed raises the concern that it's an unnecessarily and potentially undue limitation of the right to be elected, but actually that we see the removal of office holders in the protection of the rule of law, in the protection of the Hungarian constitutionalism in the previous years of their terms, but unilaterally serve the political goals and the political interest of the Orbán regime, it might be necessary to remove them from power if the constitutionalism and the rule of law would like to be restored in Hungary. And this is actually more or less the consensus also among Hungarian judicial experts and constitutional lawyers. And this is what actually the electorate of TISA voted for, which resulted in this constitutional power for the current Hungarian governing party as well.
Okay, so what changes, if any, do we expect to the constitution?
It's a declared political goal of Péter Magyar and his TISA party to create a new Hungarian constitution. What we see are interim measures and amendments of the current constitution down the road to that goal. And as mentioned, they serve the purpose of restore constitutionalism and the rule of law in the country. In the specific case of the Hungarian president, practically his mandate and his job will end tomorrow. And the Hungarian parliament has now 30 days to elect his successor. In that period, the Speaker of the Hungarian Parliament, Ágnes Forsthofer, will act as an interim president, and Prime Minister Péter Magyar today started negotiations with chess grandmaster Judit Polgár, who was actually proposed and in some ways suggested by 16 both conservative and progressive Hungarian public personalities as a new president who could really symbolize actually the unity of the Hungarian nations. So most likely we already know who will be the next Hungarian president, who might be in office for 5 years or until the new constitution that was already announced will enter into force.
Okay, let's move on now to Péter Szijjártó. He's got a new job. He's part of Orbán's, of course, government, or was part of his government. He's got a spanking new job with BYD, the Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer. And it's quite an attractive role, I understand. He was also, of course, responsible for giving state subsidies to BYD when they invested in the battery plant in Hungary. Does that situation require some scrutiny?
Certainly, and as far as publicly available information concerns, Péter Szijjártó is already under investigations with regard to his potential undue ties, not to Beijing, but to the Kremlin. And obviously, we can also see this current case as an example of revolving doors. Indeed, he championed the investment of BYD, as he also championed the investment of battery manufacturer CATL in Hungary. And the Hungarian government supported those investments with a very significant amount of taxpayer money. However, Péter Szijjártó is not only one former member of the previous Orbán governments. Péter Szijjártó used to be the foreign minister and the leader of Hungarian diplomacy in 12 out of the 16 years of the Orbán regime. And in this period, he hasn't only championed the business interest of Chinese companies, but also actually the geopolitical and sheer political interest of Beijing and the People's Republic of China. Just to mention a couple of examples, Hungary was the only EU member state, and Péter Szijjártó, the only EU foreign minister, who clearly echoed the Chinese position in 2016 with regard to the South China Sea arbitration case. Thanks to him was the European Union unable to condemn in several cases human rights abuses in Hong Kong or Xinjiang. So my alternative explanation is that we see how Beijing actually is providing a safety belt for pro-Chinese politicians, signaling for others in Europe and in other continents that if you are our friends, even after the end of your political career, you can enjoy a very comfortable life with very lucrative corporate positions because we are not forgetting our friends. So what we see here, I think, is not entirely only a revolving door case, but a political signal, a political message from Beijing that this is how friends are rewarded.
Yes, well, it's not so much the revolving door, but what happened in the years when Szijjártó was foreign minister and championing the investments over the period of his tenure in Orbán's government. Now, you mentioned the relationship with China. I would also like to talk about the relationship with Russia, the Kremlin. I mean, what's that going to look like? It's going to be completely reshaped, isn't it, with Péter Magyar in the driving seat?
I think the new Hungarian governments will have a very pragmatic and potentially, at least in the public, low-key approach to Russia and China. Obviously, we have seen very significant changes in the Russia policy. For example, repeated condemnations of military attacks on civilian targets in Ukraine. We also have seen that Russian diplomats were expelled from Hungary, but we also know that even if in the long run the new Hungarian government might be committed in the phasing out of Russian fossil energy import, in the short run there is a mutual interest in pragmatic cooperation, and against that background, I think we cannot expect policy moves from Budapest that will really result in open conflicts or a hostile relationship with Moscow. And the same applies to Beijing. Obviously, in the Hungarian public, there were very critical debates about the environmental impact and the necessity and the business benefits or economic benefits of the Chinese investments of CATL and BYD in Hungary. But it's a matter of fact that these investments would have been welcome actually in every member state of the European Union. And the new government understands their importance, and they will try to avoid open conflict with Beijing in the future as well.
Right, okay, but Hungary doesn't seem to be changing its stance towards supporting Ukraine in its defensive war against Russia. Do you think that'll change?
No, that will certainly not change. And we also see the signs that actually the relationship between Kiev and Budapest might remain tense in the foreseeable future as well. This week, Ukraine was only able to start accession negotiations under one further cluster instead of the envisioned 5. This was in a large extent the consequence of Hungarian opposition of accelerating the accession talks with Kiev. We see that after the compromise on the protection of Hungarian minorities was successfully concluded in the first months of the Magyar government in Hungary, actually Budapest lost incentives and lost interest in further improving the relationship with Kiev, and without this benefit, I don't see any motivation by Péter Magyar, who appeared to be actually rather skeptical towards Ukraine in his personal stand, would see this as a political priority.
Okay, in the last minute or so that we have left, Daniel, what about the relationship between the EU or Hungary and the rest of the EU? Do you see any improvement there?
We see a clear honeymoon period in that relationship, and it was actually a success seen on both sides. It's a very important milestone in the relationship that Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Péter Magyar could announce the unfreezing of almost 16 billion previously suspended EU funds from Hungary. Obviously, it's an open question what part of this 16 billion can be disbursed to Hungary, particularly under the Corona Recovery Fund until the end of the year. But what we see is that European partners are appreciating that the vetoes, which were actually the main characteristics of Hungarian EU policy under Viktor Orbán, are gone, and that the new government is behaving really as a constructive part of the European mainstream in the EU institutions.
Right, well, certainly seems to be light at the end of that particular tunnel. Daniel Hegedüs, as always, thank you so much for sharing your analysis with our audience, and have a good evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, World News coming right up.